Ladies and gentlemen, very, very warm welcome to this event. I think we have a very stimulating hour or so ahead of us. The rationale for this event, of course, lay in timing, and as you know, that timing is an important anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the Élysée Treaty between France and Germany. As it turned out, that the timing of the event, the rationale was reconfirmed by the events of the last 24 hours, and you hardly need me to remind you what those are. It makes really one ask whether the French and German embassies, when they began this discussion with Chatham House several months ago about this event, whether they knew something. Clearly, the relationship operationally, in terms of information exchange and so on, would appear to be in good working order. I suspect we'll put our fingers on some deficiencies or dysfunctionalities as well as the many areas in which it's working well this evening. I'm Maurice Fraser. I'm Associate Fellow Europe here at Chatham House and Professor of Politics at the LSE. I promise you light touch chairmanship for the next 60 minutes, which isn't all that long, and obviously we need to leave time for questions. If I can ask you please to switch off your mobile phones, as I'm told that it interferes with the sound system here, and please also note that the event is on the record. Now, it's my great pleasure to invite the ambassadors of France and Germany to say a few words, which I shall do in a moment. And then I will ask our three excellent speakers to offer us some remarks. Again, they'll be short and sweet, hopefully. Starting with, on my right, Ulrike Guérot, who is a Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin. Dominic Moïsi, who is co-founder and senior advisor at IFRI in Paris, and also visiting professor at King's College London, and Anand Menon, seated at the end here, who is also associate fellow Europe here at Chatham House and professor at King's College London. So I think you'll agree that we couldn't have lined up a better panel of speakers this evening. As I said, I propose to start by inviting the French ambassador, His Excellence Bernard Emier, to say a few words about the conception and purpose of this event, and then I'll ask Ambassador Baumgarten to do likewise. Ambassador.
Well, Maurice, thank you very much, Minister of State, my lords, messieurs les présidents, friends, colleagues, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, anyone who has been following British politics over the past few weeks will know that only a few days ago, the date and significance of January 22nd, 1963, and of the Élysée Treaty were largely unknown here, except by experts, and you are experts, all of you. But thanks to the Prime Minister's speech, in which there is a reference to it, which we appreciated deeply, perhaps never in the past 50 years has the Élysée Treaty been talked about so much in Britain. Georg, the German ambassador, and myself wanted there to be a real celebration in London of the 50th anniversary of this treaty, signed by General de Gaulle and Chancellor Adenauer, to explain to you more clearly this Franco-German partnership, this very special relationship. As well as this evening's event, there is a series, by the way, of joint cultural events this week at the Institut Français and Goethe Institute, if you want to know more about cultural affairs from our two countries. What we are doing is celebrating a relationship which is not exclusive, since it was, is, and will be at the service of the European enterprise. We are the engine of Europe. We are not its directorate or directoire, as we say in French. Our alliance is here to serve everyone and is open to everyone. It does not crush, it acts as the driving force. In particular, we feel we need the United Kingdom in Europe. And that's why we wanted to have this conference centered on the three countries. We'd like the UK to make a major and positive contribution to the EU, and the French President would like the UK to remain a strong partner within the European Union. We are stronger with her, and our action against terrorism in Mali right now is yet more proof of it. But we believe that being a member of the EU entails a number of obligations, and that you cannot have an à la carte Europe. The French president respects the decisions to hold a referendum in this country, but does not believe Europe can be negotiated in the process. Of course, the current European debate, which we welcome, may be a factor of uncertainty, but let's remember together Jean Monnet, I quote, "Europe will be forged in crisis." And we are clearly in the midst of a crisis. And add that Europe must be the answer to and not the cause of our current problems, which we must resolve together within this union. So our discussion this evening, and thank you, Maurice, for sharing it with a light touch, is going to be not only a look back at the past, and you may have noted what has been done in Berlin on the 22nd of January, and maybe not that many people read, the outcome of these celebrations and the statements which were adopted on that day. And I do invite all my British friends to read, these statements. I know the discussion of today is particularly relevant, and I know it will be very lively and passionate because there is a great deal at stake for all of us. So thank you for Chatham House for being a partner with us tonight, and I'm looking forward to your discussions. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now the German Ambassador, His Excellency Georg Baumgarten, will share some thoughts with us as well.
Yes, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Bernard, Maurice, and certainly a great thank you to everybody who came here from Germany, from Paris, to discuss on the big three, or Duopoly, France, Germany, and Britain and Europe. It couldn't be a better date. I think de Gaulle and Adenauer must have known that the debate is going on. At the time, the two were underwriting the treaty. Britain was not a member of the EU, but the ever closer union was already in the treaties. And now we will see how the future will be. We certainly have a certain uncertainty, and we will see how this works. As far as the German-French relation is concerned, for the last 50 years, there was a real ever closer union in the sense of growing trust, growing confidence, and what is very important, reliability. This does not mean that we were not diverse. And sometimes when I read British newspapers, I have the feeling that whenever there is a little difference between the two countries, this is seen as, oh, there is another chance for a big balance of power. This is pure nonsense, because we live from our rich diversity. And normally, when we come from different standpoints, we have very good mechanisms in place to come to common standpoints, which normally is a compromise. And the basis of this is the Treaty of the Elysee. The basis of this is that statesmen, officials, ministers meet so often that they have no chance to avoid dialogue. They meet, they have to talk about it. There is no way of saying, let them do what they want. No way for isolationism. You're always exposed in Germany to a French standpoint, and you're always exposed in France with a German standpoint. And you do this in a way which is not using the other, but taking the other in his human dignity, in his own views, but at the same time looking for common ground. And this is the point where I always tell my friends here in Britain when they talk to me and say, but you know, you need us to balance the French. I say I have too much respect for the dignity of the British citizens in the sense of Immanuel Kant. Never use any human being as an instrument. Use him in his own dignity. And that forbids me to use the British people as a balance against anybody. I want to debate with you, speak with you, and maybe at a certain time we can build up something which we already reached with France. We start a bit late, but we should do the same.
Well, thanks very much, Ambassador. We have until, I'll ask our speakers to keep their remarks brief so that at about 7 o'clock we'll have time for half an hour of questions. I'm also asked to remind you that there is a reception upstairs afterwards at 7:30 to which everybody is very cordially invited. So without further ado, Ulrike, I'd like to ask you please to share some thoughts with us. And
yeah, it's really a great pleasure for me to being here and having the occasion to speak here also. And I want to be starting with a very personal remark. I'm nearly as old as the Élysée Treaty. I'm 48. I'm born nearby Bonn, and I'm basically born into the legacy of that treaty. And obviously, I attended the celebrations in Bundestag and in the Philharmonie. And at the end, perhaps you have seen this, we had Ode an die Freude from Beethoven, and I cried. And I was not the only one. And for all those who have been experiencing this, I think we refilled emotions in the Franco-German relationship. And because many of the UK people don't sense what it is beyond politics, but that there's a very strong emotional tie, sometimes I think you get that partnership wrong in your analysis. So, beyond emotions. I think that when talking about what is really the driving force behind the German-Franco tandem, then it is because it's the yeast. Dispute is good in Franco-German relationships. It's a myth that Franco-German relations have always been good. They never have been, in a way. If you go back in history, you start with Fouché plans, you go through Eurocorps, you go for Euro making, you read the book of Pascal Richer in 96, the War of 7 Years, how France and Germany made the Euro, you will realize that the relationship in terms of romanticism was never good. It was always fight. But the real thing is that more fight, the better it was. And this is the misinterpretation when now everybody's talking about Merkozy and Mr. Sarkozy and Merkel was so good. It was not good because symbiosis in the Franco-German relationship is not good for Europe, and too much of a symbiosis kills the European integration project. Therefore, I argue that Merkel-Hollande, with more or less different opinions on many things now, is again probably going into a very creative moment of Franco-German relations. That's my first point. Second point. There were a couple of pollings on Franco-German relations and how people perceive each other. And I think there's something that Germany especially will need to be very careful about. And what I mean is that there is a sort of narcissistical offense in the French way to look at Germany, yeah? A Freudian sort of narzisstische Kränkung. What I mean is that 82% of Germans still think that we are in a peer relationship with France, but only 53% of French think the same and 41% think we are not. And this reflects, among other questions, and I don't detail more figures here, gives you a strong feeling of inferiority of current sort of French citizens who see the German dominance, the economic dominance, the whole discourse about German model and so. And I think Germany will need to be very careful. And by the way, it is, because if you read the declaration just we had 2 days ago, you will see that it's a sort of reciprocal approach about, the ambassador said it, we learn each other, you know. So I guess we are moving beyond that momentum of narcissistical offense. But I think it's worthwhile noting that France, the political landscape today, is in a very fragilized situation at large. The third point is that this fragilization that you can detail comes obviously from an economic lacking behind Germany. But now France has been showing that it is able to undertake some decent passes where the structural reforms. We have seen labor market reforms. We have been seeing steps on retirement. So I think there is a discourse now starting in France, which is that France has to undergo some serious structural reforms on the economic side, but also political modernization. And for those who are interested in going further down, read what is, for instance, I just pick one, but Bruno Le Maire doing, who is developing a very interesting discourse on how to modernize France politically, and that is also good for Europe. What I'm saying here is my fourth point, that I think that France and Germany are in a way further ahead than the UK in its discussion about Europe. What I mean is both countries have basically overcome their moment of catharsis, right? Germany had a moment of catharsis in 2010, 2011, when this country was sort of thinking we can go global alone, we can do BRICS, we can go China. I mean, you know what I mean. We had this discussion and we pushed it very far. But we moved back, and there was clearly a change in the German policy last year. And now France basically had the same discussion about what is the price we are ready and going to pay for Europe. And France is just answering a big yes to that same question that Germany answered yes last year. And the southern countries, Greek, Italy, Spain, if you go there, these countries have all answers with a very big yes, that despite all the harm they have to go through, Spain, unemployment, Greece or so, they had the catharsis, they all want to stay in, they all gave a bold yes to the question, which price are we going to pay for Europe, because Europe is not for free, and they all agreed after catharsis we pay a price. And the only country which is left on that argument is the UK, and we are going to see the answer. My fifth point is that in terms of convergence, I think France and Germany are now well underway of much more convergence that we have seen in recent years. You all heard that Merkel and Hollande both talked financial transaction tax. There are a couple of very interesting points. I think the French got the message that they need to work on competitiveness. I think the Germans got the message that they need to do something on social, fiscal, wages, domestic demand. So I think there's a macro discourse, with Germany lagging behind on the macro level, France lagging behind on the micro level, and this is going to sort of, as it's sort of the capacity of the Franco-German tandem to bring different points together. I think this is what is just precisely happening now. The second point, what is coming together, is very interesting, because the former Franco-German dispute with respect to European integration was intergovernmentalism on the French side versus federalization on the German side. And I think we are beyond this discussion now. And the next discussion we are having creatively is a discussion between executivism in France, running the European system with a more executive spin, which comes from the French tradition, versus a more parliamentarian-based tradition in Germany. I think that's the new dichotomy in the Franco-German dispute, but I think honestly this is going to work out. I heard the French industry minister a week ago in Berlin talking for the first time openly on this German idea of a Eurozone parliament. He was positive, and I think that's a good start for a new discussion how we shape a transnational democracy in Europe. Last point, I didn't talk about Mali, EADS, the nuclear question. Obviously, we are standing on different poles. Obviously, there is still this je t'aime moi non plus sort of feature in the Franco-German relations on all of them, yeah. But as long as we stay in discussion, I think we can work on all these issues always. And what we are doing through the Euro crisis, and that's my last sentence, I think the Euro crisis now, we are touching a point where we are losing a buffer zone of ambivalences. Franco-German relations were 50 years of ambivalences on security, on NATO versus not NATO, on gouvernements économiques versus political union, and semantically we turned around like a cat around a pot of milk, right? And I think the Eurozone reduces the buffer zone of ambivalences, and if we go both together through that reality check, we are going to build after 2014, after the German elections, a very strong Europe, independently of what the UK decision is then.
Thank you for that spirited intervention, Ulrike. Dominique.
Well, I'm much older than Ulrike, and if I may be personal for the beginning, I would say I remember vividly what happened in my family when the Treaty of the Élysée was signed. My father, who survived Auschwitz, had imposed an embargo on German products in my family. So my mother and myself, whenever we would buy into a shop, would turn every product to see whether it had the infamous made in Germany, and we would leave it. That night, my father came back and said, the embargo is over. It was a very, in fact, dramatic moment. That is what a process of reconciliation is about. And he said visibly, history must go on. And my mother was able to buy the Miel washing machine she has been dreaming for the last 16 years. And I think, if I may be personal one more moment, I went to Berlin when the wall fell. I brought a piece of the wall, and I wrote a piece speaking to that piece of the wall. And in that piece, I said that I cherish this moment, which was a moment of reconciliation between my three identities as a Frenchman, as a European, and as a Jew. And again, I asked my father, who was a very old man at that time, can I write that? And he gave me his blessing. And I wrote it, and I had a debate in the world press with Elie Wiesel, who said, I fear what is behind the wall. And I had said just the opposite, because my values were very much with the collapse of that wall. I think, and I stop being personal, I think what we are celebrating, that treaty, is an event that is a result of a process that remains unique in the world. Travel to Asia, travel to Latin America, travel to the Middle East. When Europe is seen as a model, it is above all seen as a model of reconciliation. What the Asians have not achieved, the Europeans did it. And they did it thanks to the depths of thinking of a few people that came out immediately after the war with a spirit of reconciliation. I mean, there's a meeting on a railway station between a man that comes out of a German concentration camp, who is both French and German, who was born Jewish, became Christian. His name is Joseph Rovan. And Joseph Rovan, on that quay in 1945, declares, we are going to have the Germany of our merits, the Germany we deserve. If we treat Germany with openness, with confidence, we'll be able to rebuild Europe. And in Germany, there were leaders who understood that message, who were carried away positively by Christian feeling of repentance. And between 1870 and 1945, there were 3 wars between France and Germany that led Europe to its suicide and the world to the brink of catastrophe. For the last 70 years, there was no war between France and Germany. And the idea that there could be a war in Europe has simply become absurd. This process required a certain number of criteria. First, a feeling that we had been deeply defeated, all of us, collectively. Second, of course, there were the ruins surrounding us. We knew what we were coming off. We knew what we don't want to see returning. Then there was the Soviet threat. Then there was the enlightened generosity of the United States. Specific conditions which allowed the process to take place. And it is important to keep in mind that de Gaulle is the follower, from that standpoint, from Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet, and others. He did not create Franco-German reconciliation. He sealed it. It's the culminating point of an evolution. What we are celebrating is a process that culminates on that day, not an event in itself. Enough for history. Let's come now quickly to the present. Yeah, very quickly. 3 points. What strikes me today is that in the way the world looks at Europe, there is a huge difference. I would even go as far as saying a divorce between Europe as a model, which is greeted very positively, admired, and Europe as an actor, which is less taken seriously than it should be. And one of the reasons for that divorce is that the French have been used to do economy and finance with the German and security with the British. That kind of schizophrenia is hindering the European future. And I'll come because I look at your face, which is becoming more severe by the minute. I come for a second to the British. I'm not only emotional on the Franco-German reconciliation, but I'm an Anglophile. There is one portrait as I work in my library, and it is the portrait of Churchill, because he said no to defeat. And Churchill is the reason why we can be proud, but Churchill is also the cause why the British are so far away from Europe. Nothing fails more than success. You won the war. And because you won the war, you felt it unnecessary to engage into that process. And when you came in, it was very late, and you lost the reflexes that make European. And now I would say, very quickly and solemnly, we need you. Not ready to pay any price for having you, but we need you. We need the mother of democracies. We need the pragmatism which Great Britain brings it. And I would say you need us, because London may be the capital of the world, but Great Britain is in as poor economic condition as my country, France. So if there is a country in denial on that score, it's you as much as we. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominique. Anand, Menon.
I feel slightly like I'm being blamed for something I didn't do here. But, I mean, as the Brit on the panel, I suppose it falls to me to say something about events yesterday. So what I want to do is talk briefly about David Cameron's speech and try and contrast the way we in Britain do Europe with how the French and Germans have come to do it, and try and draw some conclusions from that. I thought it was a very good speech in many ways. I thought the first two-thirds of it were one of the most cogent defences of active British engagement in Europe I've ever heard. And I think many of the criticisms that the Prime Minister made of the European Union were both valid and enjoy pretty widespread support across the European Union. When he got to the end of his speech, I was put in mind of a speech I heard in this room about a month ago by Tony Blair. And Tony Blair opened that speech by saying that there is often a tension between short-term politics and long-term policy. And it struck me that that was the tension that lay at the heart of the speech we heard yesterday. It was a speech that dealt with the short-term politics rather cleverly, I thought. In terms of the political calculations of the Conservative Party, I think the Prime Minister achieved what he wanted to achieve remarkably well. But in policy terms, I think there are two things that are worth saying and two criticisms worth making, apart from the criticism that I would make on ideological grounds, that it saddens me that the central plank of British policy in Europe is that workers shouldn't have rights. But the two substantive things I would say about the speech are, one, I think the Prime Minister is making a lot of very rosy assumptions about the mechanics of renegotiation, controlling the timing of renegotiation, let alone getting the renegotiation he wants. I think he's being incredibly optimistic there, and I'm not sure things will pan out exactly as the speech assumes that they will. But the second thing, apart from the in-out debate, which I think is equally important, is that this government has put Britain in a situation that no previous British government, since we've been members of the European Community or Union, has put us in, of being absent from key discussions, of saying to the others, you go ahead, we're happy to watch. That is something that Margaret Thatcher didn't do. John Major spoke about being at the heart of Europe. And there is a phrase in French, which is les absents ont toujours tort. And it strikes me that that is a phrase that might come to apply rather well to us in our situation within the European Union. And there is a fundamental difference between the way we in Britain see European integration and what it entails and what many of our partners, and notably the French and Germans, think about it. We see the EU in purely transactionalist terms, in terms of bargains, in terms of interest, nothing more and nothing less. In France and Germany, the bilateral relationship has been used to change what they think and to change how they act, not simply to get what they want. And there's a fundamental difference. It's a relationship that academics have called embedded bilateralism. I'm not saying for a moment that there isn't power involved in the Franco-German relationship. There is. The great French political scientist Stanley Hoffmann referred to the relationship as the balance of imbalances. Dominic Moïsi himself, in a wonderful piece from, I think, the late 1990s, spoke of the balance between the mark and the bomb. There are trade-offs in the Franco-German relationship like there are in any other, but there's far more to it than that. And there are two specific things about the relationship that strike me as a Brit. One is the sheer intensity of contact between the two states, intensity of the formal intergovernmental meetings. They have joint cabinet meetings now, regularly, which is something I don't think many Brits are aware of, but has tremendous significance. Ministers and foreign ministries in particular are in touch all the time. Diplomats from one country on their exchanges represent the other country in international organizations on occasion. The levels of official contacts and unofficial contacts are staggering. And on top of that, you have youth exchanges, language teaching, and so on and so forth. It has been a 50-year process that has sensitized each country to the other in a way I think we in Britain find it quite hard to conceive of. The second thing about this relationship that I think leaves many Brits cold is the level of symbolism involved. From the initial signing, the de Gaulle-Adenauer ceremony, and the kiss that they gave each other on that day, to the fields of Verdun when we saw a right-wing German chancellor and a left-wing socialist French president holding hands by the graveyard. Symbolism has been used very effectively and very powerfully. It has been used to make this relationship about more than interests and to make it about feeling a sense of common destiny. And what has been remarkable about that is that in this context of a shared desire to work for the relationship, specific policy differences become an asset rather than a hindrance. It is hard to find, in many ways, two more different countries than France and Germany. As Ulrike said, they don't work together because they agree. They work together despite the fact that in terms of economics, political structures, views of the world, they could almost not be more different. But because they're committed to trying to work together, their differences have provided a vehicle to allow the European Union to progress. Because quite often in the Council, other member states will say, if the French and Germans can reach a compromise from being so far apart, we can fall in line with this compromise too. It is a strange relationship that is very close, but one that is based on difference as much as it is on similarity. And perhaps the most striking thing about this relationship for me is it is one within which the participants have accepted the fact that they will on occasion sacrifice their own short-term interests for the longer-term goal of preserving the relationship. This is something that wouldn't come naturally, I suspect, to most British negotiators in most international fora. But it is because of this ability that the French and Germans have managed to shape European integration as effectively as they have. It is a relationship that is both institutionalized and that has normative foundations. And I think because of the depth of the relationship, it will easily survive some of the vicissitudes of the current relationship. As Ulrike again said, it has survived the end of the Cold War, it has survived changes of leadership in the past and will continue to do so. It is a relationship, finally, that I think can provide valuable lessons to us in Britain about the way you go about exercising leadership in multilateral fora. Thank you.